it's gotten to be fairly easy for me to write for these characters. I've done, I think, 6 novels now, something like 12 or 13 issues of the comic book. And I have a strict rule, which is when I write a line of dialogue, if I can't hear, if I can't hear Grissom saying it, if I can't hear William Peterson's voice in my mind, then I got to go back to work on that piece of dialogue until it sounds like the show. Have a tendency to sort of bathe myself in the show when I'm working on it. I tend, if I'm working on the game or I'm working on a novel, I will always watch 1 episode a day on tape or on DVD. When I first saw the show, when I sat down with the first 6 or 8 episodes and was deciding whether or not I wanted to do this gig, it was a cop show without any car chases. It was a cop show without shootouts. There were no fist fights. And yet it was compelling, and it seemed to be action-packed. And all of the action, all of the violence, all of that stuff is done in the reconstructions, which has that wonderful expressionistic style. Now, in the games, we also do the reconstructions. That becomes a very important part. You can't really do CSI unless you have these reconstructions, and sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes we show you what might have happened, and we think that's what happened, and then later we do it again. In the novels in particular, I get inside the story in a way that TV doesn't, because it's exterior. The game is, of all the things I've written on CSI, the game is the most like writing the show. And I have to say, it's extremely gratifying. The biggest thrill for me in doing these video games is, as the sort of roadshow CSI guy, the guy who does the novels and does the comic books and does the licensing work, I don't get to hear these actors speak my lines. I hear them in my head, as many crazy people do. But this game gave me the opportunity, these 2 games have given me the opportunity to hear William Peterson, Mark Helgenberger, speak my lines. And I have such great respect for this cast, it gives me a really big charge. From my perspective, and admittedly it's my perspective, it would be better to inject the gaming elements into a real story than to try to inject story elements into the game. It's always a bit of a compromise, and there's no way around that. It's difficult for something to be 2 things at once, and so I think that's one of the remarkable things about this game is that it can do 2 things at once. It can be, I hope, on some level a satisfying story, and on another level that gaming experience that is the primary reason people come to CSI, the video game.
The things that we do, we're responsible for responding to the crime scene, where we identify, so we walk through and we're taking notes. So we need a notepad and a pen, and we write down our observations. Whether they're positive observations or negative observations, we still need to write those down, because sometimes a negative observation can turn into a positive aspect of the investigation. After we do the walkthrough or the identification, then we do what we call documentation. The documentation is done through photography, the notes, which we've already done, and then a crime scene diagram. So in terms of photography, we have to use a camera, and we document in a specific order, and there's ways of properly documenting a crime scene with a camera. Then for the crime scene diagram, you use a sketch pad, and for the most part, and then you draw out your area, and then you take measurements and write down all the measurements on the scratch paper. This is what we call a rough sketch. Once we're done, we come back, we put that into a computer, and we have what we call a finished sketch, that the lines are all nice and neat, everything is to scale, and that's what we can attach to the report, so the detective who's investigating the crime has an idea of what the crime scene looked like if they weren't there, or even more so, the attorneys that are involved, the judge, and eventually the jury can get a perspective of what the crime scene appeared and what the layout of the crime scene was. Crime scene management is extremely important, especially in a high-profile case, because everybody wants to come in and see the crime scene. However, we need to take precautions to protect the physical evidence. If there are people that need to be in the crime scene, There are ways of doing it without destroying the evidence. However, we try to keep that down to a very minimum. Once the crime scene has been documented and the evidence has been collected and preserved, then we will allow more people to come in to get a visualization of what the crime scene is about. But crime scene management is extremely important. It's kind of like a balance here. The more eyes you have, the more you're going to find, but yet you don't want to have too many eyes, because then you'll trample other items of evidence, and you still have to keep up the communication, which is extremely important. A person who goes in immediately and starts taking pictures is somebody who is in a rush. The first thing you need to do is you need to take it methodically and in an organized manner. In other words, walk into the crime scene and you need to identify what it is that you have. So when you walk into the crime scene, look around. Look around all the walls, look around on the furniture, look around on the floor, look around on the ceiling. You don't know what's up there. You may have had some bloodletting that occurred, which the blood spatter may have been flung onto a surface, which in this case might be a ceiling. In terms of the tools of the trade, once we're done the documentation, we get to processing the physical evidence. Now, we can do that in several different ways. We can use powders, which I've shown you, or we can use chemicals. Chemicals can be used on different items of evidence. But for the most part, those are types of evidence that we need to take back to the lab and do it under a hood where the air is flowing, because they can be very damaging to your health. So we will use different things. Some chemicals that we'll use is such as ninhydrin. Ninhydrin reacts with the amino acids that are found in a fingerprint. Or we'll use sodium chloride, which reacts to the salts within the fingerprint. There are other chemicals that are being developed all the time that are becoming more and more sensitive to the components within a fingerprint itself. So that's the processing. And then, of course, there is the collection. We have a variety of tools that we can use for the collection of evidence, such as tweezers or forceps. We may need scissors. We may need a knife to cut a hole out from the wall. Whatever it takes, that we have to try to collect that evidence. Once that evidence is collected, and it's an extremely important step, which is the last step, is the preservation of the evidence. And to preserve the evidence, it takes a variety of different methods. If you take something out, you may need to preserve it in a paper bag, such as body fluids. If you put it in plastic, it will decompose, and therefore you've lost your evidence. So therefore you have to know what type of evidence you're dealing with so you can properly preserve the evidence. If the evidence is destroyed or lost due to bad preservation techniques, then you've lost that item of evidence. As a crime scene investigator, our ultimate goal is to determine the truth. That is the ultimate goal. The jury is our test. That's when we get tested. The attorneys will ask us in court questions and try to make sure that everything was done appropriately. And then it's up to the jury to determine whether or not it was done correctly and what the evidence is saying. We are trained and taught to interpret the evidence. And so our ultimate goal is to determine the truth. If that truth exonerates somebody, then so be it. If that truth finds and leads to the guilt of a person, so be it. But the ultimate goal is the truth. What we do is we take the glass and we visually look for a fingerprint itself. You can actually see the print itself within the light, and it will reflect off the oils. So we take the brush and put it in the powder, gently take some of the excess powder off, and then we take the brush and then go over the surface. And as you go over the surface, you can see the print develop on the surface itself. Once you find the print, then you gently go over and you want to stroke the brush with the flow of the ridges. You have the ridges, which is what develops, and the furrows are the areas in between the ridges. Again, well, part of our job is to identify, document, which we could take a photograph, then we would process, which is what we just did, and then we need to collect and preserve the evidence. So the next step would be collect. The way we do that is we take the tape, and it's special fingerprint tape, and we tear it off, and you rub it over the surface of the print itself. And as you rub over the top of the print, this will allow the print to adhere to the tape. Okay. Once we're done, we take a picture showing where the print is located on the object. Then we lift the tape and the fingerprint comes off, and we put it on the fingerprint card, allowing us not only to collect but also preserve the physical evidence. When we get to a semi-porous surface such as papers or wall or a painted object like a windowsill, we're better off using a magnetic powder. And what's nice about the magnetic powder is you have a magnet for a wand instead of a brush. And when you dip the wand into the powder, it adheres, and then when you pull it up, the powder's there. And then you apply it to the surface where you think there might be a print, and then you can see how the print develops on the object. And then when you're done, you just put the powder back, and if there's any excess, you can just pick it up and put it back into your jar.